PROSTEP is a proud platinum sponsor at COExperience Virtual 2020, exclusive sponsors for the Women in Technology panel. Longtime leading partners PROSTEP give you the tools to extend your DOSO solutions, enabling you to optimize and provide integrative solutions within your enterprise. With vendor-neutral connectivity to connect virtually any system, OpenPDM provides 3DEXPERIENCE with connectors for bidirectional data flow to leading PLM and ERP systems. And the leading data exchange platform for those in the discrete manufacturing industry, OpenDXM Global X, gives you secure data exchange to easily integrate joint ventures, partners and suppliers, and 3D PDF and HTML5 visualization solutions to leverage model-based design, giving you and your team a common design environment, ultimately to help facilitate the communication, data and verification between your engineering silos.
Again, my name is Paul Downing. I manage our North American operations for PROSTEP, and we're here to talk about migration. If you don't know who PROSTEP is, we are a vendor-neutral company, which means that we don't resell Siemens products. We don't resell Dassault products, right? We sit in the middle. We act as a neutral advisor to companies who want that type of advice, and then we help integrate these systems. That's what we've been doing for our entire company life of about 25 years. We're kind of a unique company if you're not familiar with us. Across the bottom, you see a whole bunch of company names. Each of these companies own roughly 10% of PROSTEP as a consortium for these companies to solve data exchange interoperability challenges. One special company I want to talk about just for a second is called the PROSTEP IVIP Association. This is a nonprofit standards consortium based out of Germany that helps invent many of the standards that we use every day. So that's a big part of PROSTEP, and that flavors everything that we do, right? Industry best practices and creating new open standards. As I mentioned, we're a vendor neutral company. What that means is that we have strategic partnerships, in this case, as an example, with Dassault. So we have all sorts of development levels and certifications so that when we build commercial tools, we are part of their development program, part of their development platform. And that's true not just of Dassault, but all the major players in the PLM space, and even others that aren't listed on this slide. When it comes to 3DEXPERIENCE, the subject of our slide, the reason we're here is to look at migrating to 3DEXPERIENCE. Probably all of you have other systems that you have to bring into that ecosystem, and that's what PROSTEP enables. What we're really talking about is the digital thread and connecting that. So by bringing tools that connect these different applications, we can help enable a digital thread through this entire lifecycle platform. Okay, getting on to migration. There's 3 keys to a successful PLM migration. The first has to do with communication, making sure that your project is well understood and well communicated. We recommend that you have some sort of communication champion as part of your migration program office, and we also recommend you have a migration program office because oftentimes these migrations are transformational to your company, right? Whether you intend them to be or not. There's pretty hard to switch something as fundamental as a PLM system without having some sort of dramatic impact on your organization. We'll reinforce some of these as we go along, but it's important as well to bring in stakeholders from across the company, everybody you can possibly think of, earlier sooner than later. Nothing's going to sabotage or derail your migration project more quickly than either purposely or excluding somebody that you didn't think was important. They're either going to have an unexpressed requirement that you don't know about, or they're going to sit back and throw darts at your project, which you don't want. The second thing is document, document, document. We all hate to do it. I hate to do it. Everybody hates to do it. You need to really understand what your requirements are, why you're doing this, what you hope to get out of it, what the business hopes to get out of it. You need to get it down in writing, and you need to get it agreed to with all the major stakeholders. And finally, our recommendation is to make sure the business is driving your process and driving your migration. I might offend a few people, I'm sorry. This is not an IT project. IT is executing a large part of this project, right? I come from an IT background, but the business should be driving it. It shouldn't just be IT deciding to do an upgrade for the sake of deciding to do an upgrade. That's not going to lead to a happy migration. Again, we want to reiterate that business should be driving the migration. It's a business topic first and a technical topic second. Yes, there are technical constraints. The business knows the requirements. The business knows what's going on in engineering. It's not the IT, right? And then finally, not only from planning and execution, the business needs to be a key participant in the migration, whether that's testing, whether that's validation. If you try to do it independent of the business, you'll fail. And I've got some war stories I'll share with you as we go along. This is our typical roadmap that we see. Okay, your mileage may vary depending upon what type of project you're doing. We usually start with a detailed analysis of your current state. You have to know everything about your current systems and your current processes so you can map those to your new system. One of the biggest things that people tend to skip over that I encourage you not to is this topic of data quality. If you don't address data quality issues up front, you're going to have to address them later, right? And it could bite you in the rear later. I've got a good friend, he's got a home office and he's got one of these old plaques from 50 years ago on his office that says, if you can't find the time to do it right now, when are you going to find the time to fix it later, right? And that is extremely accurate from these data migration projects. The next thing is to clearly decide what your to-be definition is. And this is harder than it sounds, because if you're migrating to a new system, typically you're migrating to a completely new system, right? So that new system is in a state of flux as well. So you have to figure out what is the to-be state of that new system, and in some cases you're chasing a moving target. Depending where you're at and how your migration project is structured, you may be looking at putting in different assessments of various end tools or migration tools. You need to figure out what it is you're going to use to do your project. And you really need to have your project planning up in the system selection phase. And again, most people will save the migration until the tail end of the project, which again is a big mistake. Next, we go through the implementation, and again, there's typical steps to implementation. To me, what I've highlighted here in red in all these is what I think is the most important part at this point is the validation. So you're going to do a migration, you need the business users to take the time to log in and say, yes, this is behaving the way I expect it to. Because again, from an IT perspective, you can say, oh, I've got an A123 over here, I've got an A123 over here, it looks good to me, but you're not the end user. And so they have to make sure it does what they want it to do. Again, when you're getting ready to go live, make sure you're doing a robust user acceptance testing. Make sure you have robust training for both your end users and the admin. Typically, we're going to do migration through a series of rehearsals, and I'll show you some more information about that. Finally, depending upon the methodology, you may go live with less than 100% of your data migrated. So depending upon how much data you have, how long it takes to migrate, you may have to do things kind of in stages. So you migrate everything as it was January 1st, it might be March right now. So then you have to go back and do a secondary migration to capture what's happened in your business between January and March, as an example. So I mentioned requirements, right? Some of the things that we have to look at with requirements, you really need to differentiate what are the requirements of your legacy systems and what are the requirements for introducing the new PLM system. For legacy, one of the most important topics you're going to have is determining what to migrate. The default answer from every single customer I've ever talked to is that we want to migrate all history, all revisions, all iterations from the start of time. Okay, great. As long as you've got $6 million and 3 years to do it, happy to do that for you, right? But it isn't necessarily what's best for your business. So that's probably the most important thing you have to think about. And honestly, you just get that out of your head right now. There's no cost-effective way to migrate millions and millions of objects going back 40 years to do it cost effectively. For the new PLM system, you need to figure out what is operational. We talked about the CAD topic and how much data to bring over. Maybe you just bring over your top 20 current active programs. Maybe you archive the rest. Certainly, we've done a lot of studies and discussed with a lot of customers, it's far easier to come up with some sort of lightweight archive of your, let's call it legacy or not current data, maybe legacy is too strong a word, and then convert ad hoc when you need it or remaster it, right? As long as you can reference the data in STEP, in JT, in 3D PDF, you don't have to convert all of it. Maybe there's some cases where that's true, but I can't think of too many, right? If you think of trying to maintain, we've got customers that have Pro-E data in Pro-Intralink that they want to convert to Creo and then put that Creo inside of 3DEXPERIENCE just in case they need it, but then they're going to start developing in CATIA. That's a lot to bite off. This is probably the second time I've mentioned, I'll probably mention it 3 more times. Document everything. Get in writing what it is that you plan to do. Get all your stakeholders to buy off on it. We literally have every stakeholder that's been identified sign a document that says, I agree this is correct, right? It avoids finger pointing. It makes people read the document. It makes sure that people agree to the document so that you don't get to the end of the migration and find out that something important was missed. So my first war story, we were working with an electric vehicle company a number of years ago, and they rented our tools, not so much our services, to do the migration. And they went to flip the switch to go live, and they found out that they missed half their data in their migration process. Well, how do you miss half the data in your migration process? You don't have all the stakeholders there. So the people that were part of this migration project knew about location A, B, and C, but they didn't know about location D, E, and F because that was before their time. And so they migrated very successfully. They had a robust test plan. They migrated. A, B, and C came over. That's great. They flipped the switch to go live, and they're like, the end user said half our data is missing. We're going to have to go back to ground zero. Roll everything back, go back to their old systems. So you really have to make sure that you take care of that. Third time I'm mentioning it, documentation, the definition phase is probably the largest part of your project, right? At least 40% of your time is going to be spent in boring meetings, writing things down on dry erase boards, in spreadsheets, in Word documents, circulating those, getting them signed off, right? Now, keep in mind, I'm talking medium to large scale migration projects. If you've only got, you make a pen, I don't want to offend anybody who's a pen manufacturer here that has 3 parts in it, it might not be that big a deal. But for companies that typically have million, 2 million, 10 million parts, you need this type of planning. The next phase or the time consumer of your project is test and validation planning. And again, you need to have very detailed test plans. You can't just have a user fire it up for 5 minutes and go, looks good to me, I got other work to do, right? You need to make sure that you tell them exactly what you want to test. I want you to create a new part. I want you to go get a new part number. I want you to do a rev. Whatever it is that you want them to test, step by step, sign off, checklist, initial, and so on. Execution phase doesn't take anything, right? We can make this as massively parallel as you want to go as fast as you want typically, right? That's just machines and CPU time and bandwidth. That's not a problem. It's the other stuff. It's the planning. And then final, reporting, make sure you've got a clean wrap-up of your project, right? That everything is migrated, you've got it documented, everybody is signed off. When it comes to budgeting, the first one was kind of about budgeting time. This is about other budgeting concerns that you might not readily think about. The first is your infrastructure. So great, we bought a brand new server to run 3DEXPERIENCE, fantastic. Okay, you also need an infrastructure to migrate. Right? It's not, there has to be something in the middle to get the data from point A to point B. And depending upon how many objects you have and how fast your throughput you need, it could be a pretty massive infrastructure that you might have to borrow, rent, or whatever. We've all been part of projects where at the last second they decided that they needed more performance, more throughput, so they take the company credit card and run out to Best Buy and buy a dozen systems and throw them up in a conference room and just start using that to burn cycles. Licenses could be a very costly thing. So depending upon how you do your migration and what shape your source data is and target data is, if you have to take the time now to go through and heal and remediate all of your, let's say, bad or less than suboptimized CAD data, those tools can be pretty expensive, right? You may need migration tools like what PROSTEP sells or rents. Oftentimes you need special PDM licenses for import and export. You might need certain CAD licenses. So one way to do exports is to kind of remote control a CAD session, fire it up, and save as step, right? Well, you might need 40 NX licenses or 40 CATIA licenses temporarily. If you have a flat file format, I'll pick on ProE. This is a sole conference, I can pick on ProE. If you want the ProE toolkit to go through and interrogate your CAD data to extract key metadata to allow you to build product structures before you import that into the target system, I think, I don't want to misspeak, but I think I've heard that's around $50,000, right? So think about ancillary licenses that you might need to do your migration project in addition to your source and your target systems. So far, so good? Okay. Strategies, right? Again, as we're talking about planning, you want to think about what views are you envisioning for your system, what views go into planning, right? There's the architecture view, you've got the IT view, people saying I need this much capacity, this much bandwidth. You have the organizational view, what are the constraints for the organization, when does this migration have to be done by? Because that's going to drive other requirements. We need to look at your processes, right? So it's not just CAD data. Typically, we run into situations where the legacy system, let's say Teamcenter Enterprise for sake of illustration, they've got all their customization to Teamcenter Enterprise. They have all their processes baked into Teamcenter Enterprise. Now they're going to go deploy 3DEXPERIENCE. A lot of time is spent in, use an old term, business process reengineering, to look at those processes and see if it still makes sense to do, right? So if they had a 40-step process, does it make sense to replicate that 40-step process because everybody knows it? Or should you look and see if it still makes sense and maybe we can get that down to 10 steps instead of 40 steps? And then, of course, the data, right? And this is some of the topics we talked about. What's the quality of the data? Are we bringing over history? Typically, we find two different methodologies for migrations. The first is all sorts of different names. Big bang migration, bulk migration, I'll use those interchangeably. Extract, transform, and load. So the concept is very simple. We're going to take everything that's in your current system, dump it out into some sort of normalized database. We're going to massage the data to put it in a purpose fit for the new system, and then we're going to massively import the data into the new system. So that's what we're talking about when we say ETL or bulk migration. The other methodology is incremental or transactional. In this case, what we're doing is moving things over kind of one at a time instead of en masse with specific intent behind it. And I'll explain more about that on the next slide. From a timeline perspective, a lot of it just depends on where you fit. There is no one perfect method. So when we're talking about a bulk migration, we're talking about getting everything prepped, right? So a large prep time, and then picking a period of time, a weekend or whatever it makes sense, to import that data. So the theory is users leave on Friday on the old system, they come in Monday with the new system. With an incremental migration, what we tend to do is hook the two systems together and let things migrate in kind of a more organic fashion or a more digestible fashion. And there's pros and cons to both. So when we look at the bulk migrations, again, there's a lot of upfront planning, upfront testing, upfront validation. That's all great. And if proper testing is done, like the example I gave you before, it's great. But if the proper testing isn't done and you do this bulk migration, there can be some challenges. The other thing that you can run into with a bulk migration is data creep, right? So I mentioned the example before. We take a snapshot of your production database on January. We spend 3 months massaging the data, and then we upload the data so that you go live on April 1st. But then we got to do another incremental migration of what happened between then and now, right? And so that could drag on for a long time as well. On the incremental side, this enables you to do kind of a staged, controlled migration where you can say, I'm going to migrate these 10 users. We're going to, and you're warning these users ahead of time, hopefully they're power users. A lot of stuff isn't going to work right. You're going to use them as guinea pigs, find out what doesn't work, fix it, try it again with 10 users, and then try it again with 20 users. And as you grow bigger and bigger, you should have fewer and fewer errors. You get all the kinks worked out of the system. Right? The trick with incremental migrations, there's a lot of dependencies, right? So if that first group needs 100% of your data, then you're doing a full migration anyway, right? So you got to really think carefully about what the dependencies are as you try to do an incremental migration. And again, there is no right or wrong answer. Every company is different. Every project is different. In the end, we tend to do, it's probably oxymoronic, but mini big bang migrations, right? We pick a very self-contained department, migrate them all at once, make sure that works. Then we pick the next department, migrate them all at once, and make sure that works. But again, there is no right or wrong answer here. It's really, what are your business drivers? Maybe it has to be done. So things to consider when you're building your project, when you're executing your project. Again, you need a data migration office. You need a place where people can go within your company. What's the status? I had this problem. You have to get this loop going, this feedback loop going, so that people have one place to go to find out what's happening with that project. That group then is responsible for key performance indicators and tracking the execution. I'll give you another war story why this is important. We did a big project, it was about 2 years ago, and we were getting all of these negative reports from the management that said, this migration process is horrible. We can only migrate like 200 objects a day. This is going to take us till the end of time to do this migration project. And we're like, well, we don't understand. And so they're throwing servers on there and trying to make it massively parallel. The business, who hadn't fully bought into the migration project, it was IT driven, was only spoon feeding information into the tool. So it was basically running out of raw materials. So someone's looking at the KPI reports and going, throughput, 200 assemblies a day. You know, you guys are horrible. Okay, but input is only 200 assemblies a day. You know, so we'll do a test and throw 10,000 at it, and it blows through that in no time. Like, oh, okay. But if you don't have a central place to gather that information, there's just going to be all this finger pointing between your organizations. So some technical considerations. Typically, when we're doing a migration, we're focused on starting small and getting bigger. This is typically on a bulk migration, and we're doing this all off to the side, right? Again, we're going to clone the legacy system. We're going to migrate 10% of the data, 5% of the data, some small subset, and ask the users to kick the tires. And then we're going to continue to do that process until we have an acceptable percentage of success with this small data, and then we're going to grow that. So I carefully chose my words, acceptable percentage of success. There is no way to migrate 100% perfectly error-free data from system A to system B. Right? You have to decide what you can live with, because at some point you reach a point of diminishing returns where getting that last 10% of the data to come across perfectly and automatically is going to cost you more than just fixing it manually, right? So once we get what we think is a perfect enough test at this 10%, then you want to go through a full migration rehearsal, again, off to the side, and then, again, robust user acceptance testing against that. And then finally, you do the production migration. So it makes sense, but a lot of people just try to migrate 100% on day one, and again, you're never going to be successful on day one that way. Incremental migrations, we tend to focus on treating this like a development project, right? So agile or whatever buzzword you want to use, but basically pick a set of data, make sure that the processes work for migrating that set of data, go ahead and migrate it, then work on the next set, and then work on the next set, and work on the next set. So as long as these two systems are connected, you can always go back to the source system. You haven't shut off the source system like you might in a bulk migration. And so that way you've got kind of a slower approach, but it does take longer, right? So some risk. We get asked all the time, what are some of the risks? What are the things I have to watch out for? This is my list of pet peeves. So coming from the IT world, we always get these crazy projects, and especially when you're thinking about a big bang migration, think about the ramifications to the people doing the migration and to your company. So when we talk about a big bang migration, there's only so many long weekends, right? Depending what industry you're at, you might have a set 1 week where the plant is shut down, yay. You might be asking people to do this over Christmas or over Thanksgiving, so they're taking time away from their families. Understand the constraints you're putting on your organization. So my war story in this, I used to work for a company called EDS, Electronic Data Systems, now part of HP. And we had a customer that decided over Memorial Weekend they wanted to move their data center from the first floor to the fourth floor. I don't remember why. And for whatever reason, we said, yeah, let's do that Memorial Weekend. That makes a lot of sense. We had people sleeping in their cars for 4 days while, taking quick cat naps, just working nonstop for 4 days, killing themselves. Tuesday morning comes, we've got spotters out in the parking lot going, that looks like Bill Smith. And then somebody going, okay, Bill Smith, he's in cube 14, quick, make it work, That's the type of thing that these projects do to people, right? And especially if you pick a crazy date like that, what happens is, the last problem, you start to de-scope the migration, right? It becomes, we have to go live Christmas, that's it. Okay, well then we're gonna skip data validation. Fine, go live, we'll fix the data later. We're just gonna do this department instead of the whole thing, fine. Well, we're gonna have to shortcut training, fine, right? So be really careful on picking an absolute date, line in the sand that it can't move unless there's a strong business reason behind it. Well, there's two other risks here that I want to highlight. First is training and go live. When you're thinking about a big implementation, a big go live, it's typical for most organizations to say, well, let me give this to the corporate training department. We're going to make some nice big 3-ring binders with some shiny certificate of completions that people can frame on their desk. And over the next 6 months, we're going to have everybody go through this training program so that when we flip the switch on January 1st, everybody's going to know what to do, right? Well, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, if I went to a class 6 months ago and I put this binder on my shelf, I have forgotten everything, right? If I don't start using it immediately afterwards, I have forgotten it. If you're trying to correspond a cutover date with Thanksgiving or Christmas, right? I'm more worried about what I'm going to get Cindy Lou Who for Christmas than I am about learning the new system, right? So think about these things. They're considerations. I don't have the answers, but I want to bring out things that you need to be careful for. And then the last one, my other pet peeve, what we find is too often the migration, because it's an afterthought, is put out to, I'm going to say, your third stringers, right, or your students. And there's nothing wrong with students, but they need some guidance. They need people with experience that know what the PLM does, what the engineering data does, what it's supposed to look like. Because most companies can't take your best troubleshooters, your best aces, and say, guess what, for the next 1.5 years, you're doing data migration. You can't afford it, your other projects are going to suffer, they don't want to do it. So then they're going to say, okay, well, you know what, we got a whole bunch of interns coming in, throw them in a room, let them do the data migration. Okay. Good luck with that. Before you bite this off on your own, just look at the skill sets you need. You need someone who is a true subject matter expert on your source system and your target system. You need to completely understand the source APIs and target APIs. They need to understand engineering methodologies. There's no system that's going to do it perfectly, so there's going to be a lot of programming that you have to do in Java or C+. You're going to have to understand service-oriented architectures, REST calls, SOAP calls, all this other type of stuff. And then do you even have the time, right? Do you have people that have the time that can do this? So certainly you can do it yourself. There's a lot of companies that do it themselves successfully. Just make sure you do the planning. We have tools that can make this easier. You're welcome to use those tools or not use those tools. Other people have tools as well. We have a program called PLM Migrate. And this is purpose-built for this process. It's not going to do it yourself, right? Just like you can do a home improvement project with a handsaw, right? We're not offering the handsaw. What we're offering is, the bi-directional, miter saw, dual bevel, dual tilt, multi-axis miter. You're still going to have to do the work, right? But there's ways to make the work less painful. So I'm not going to worry about the commercials. You can download the presentation on that type of stuff. Lots of customers, okay? And we've been doing this for about 25 years. We just had our 25-year anniversary. So if you need some help, we're here. That is the quick version.
PROSTEP is a proud platinum sponsor at COExperience Virtual 2020, exclusive sponsors for the Women in Technology panel. Longtime leading partners PROSTEP give you the tools to extend your DOSO solutions, enabling you to optimize and provide integrative solutions within your enterprise. With vendor-neutral connectivity to connect virtually any system, OpenPDM provides 3DEXPERIENCE with connectors for bidirectional data flow to leading PLM and ERP systems, and the leading data exchange platform for those in the discrete manufacturing industry. OpenDXM Global X gives you secure data exchange to easily integrate joint ventures, partners and suppliers, and 3D PDF and HTML5 visualization solutions to leverage model-based design, giving you and your team a common design environment, ultimately to help facilitate the communication, data and verification between your engineering silos.